From the history books and videotapes from the early to mid-1900s, it is evident that Nazi Germany was a horrible place to live or be born. However, the younger population had a different stomach-churning reality. Some of them were kidnapped, brainwashed, and even assigned horrible tasks under the guise of loyalty and patriotism. They called themselves the Hitler Youth, and their goal was simply whatever Adolf Hitler decided. You can only imagine what kind of a life that must have been. Join us as we delve into the shocking, gut-wrenching realities of the Hitler Youth. The name Adolf Hitler represents a dark time in history, and rightfully so. Hitler is remembered as the perpetrator of several historical atrocities, but most especially for being the dictator-ruler of Germany between 1933 and 1945, the instigator of World War II, and the mastermind behind the genocide that claimed the lives of over 6 million Jews. However, as cruel and heartless as Hitler was, he understood that his vision meant nothing if his ideals weren't revered by others and passed down to younger generations. As such, Hitler was particular about the youth and children of Nazi Germany. He sought after them, both inside and outside of their academic institutions, and sought to indoctrinate and brainwash them, getting them on board with his crazy plans for not just the country, but for the world. After World War I, several youth development programs were installed across Europe, and Germany had its fair share. These programs were created for various purposes, some of them religious and others ideological, but the more prominent ones were formed for political reasons. Examples of these political groups were the Young Conservatives and the Young Protestants. And so when Hitler started hatching his plan for a revolution, he decided to build a similar program where his ideals were taught as the truth. Being the leader of the Nazi Party, Adolf Hitler established the Hitler Youth Initiative as an extension of the party in the year 1922. The group was originally intended for boys between the ages of 14 and 18, and by 1930, the Hitler Youth, also known as Hitlerjugend, or HJ, had enlisted over 25,000 boys. On the outside, the association had attractive packages, and its members indulged in several fun activities, which lured more citizens to enroll their male children. These activities included camping, hiking, sing-alongs, swimming, and others, which you would expect from a typical youth development program, say Boy Scouts, for example. However, this was just on the surface. The boys of the HJ were involved in extreme physical training, like martial arts and weapon use, military drills, and other rigorous military exercises. But the icing on the cake was that these young boys were taught the idea behind Nazism. Therefore, from such a young age, they were taught to believe, support, and fight for Hitler's cause without fail or question. The theoretical training these boys received was summarized under 3 main points. First, they were taught that as Germans, they were the supreme race, Herrenvolk, as they called it. Therefore, they were superior to every other race, and as such, it was their place to rule the world. Second, they were taught that the Jews were their arch enemies, and finally, they were taught to obey Adolf Hitler without question, because he was the embodiment of an ideal German, and the German Messiah who would lead their beloved country into a new age. These 3 rules were the bedrock of the Hitler Youth movement, and very quickly, the plague of indoctrination spread throughout the country like wildfire. Although the Hitler Youth movement was at the heart of this wicked revolution, the plague spread far beyond the organization. Therefore, it wasn't only boys who were members of the HJ who were brainwashed. The idea behind the establishment was also taught in classrooms of German schools and universities. All teachers were expected to join Nazi Teachers Association, where they were vetted for political and racial sustainability. This association made it so that only people who believed in Nazism could teach the younger German population. Jewish teachers were sacked, and German teachers who weren't on board with the idea were forced to pretend to be or were condemned to worse fates. By 1937, 97% of teachers belonged to the Nazi Teachers Association, and their goal was to groom the German children and brainwash them into embracing the atrocious idea of Nazism from a very young age. Boys and girls alike were taught to idolize Hitler, but the education specific to each gender was not the same. The boys, whether at HJ camps or within the walls of educational institutions, were taught to be effective soldiers who were swift as a greyhound, as tough as leather, and as hard as Krupp steel. The female children, on the other hand, were taught how to be ideal women, homekeepers, dutiful housewives, and devoted mothers to their children. As aforementioned, joining the Hitler Youth movement was peculiar to male children at first, but after the initial success of the HJ organization, subsidiary and more inclusive development centers were established as well. One of them was the League of German Maidens, also known as BDM, a female equivalent of HJ for German girls between the ages of 14 and 18. When the groups were first launched, membership in HJ and BDM were optional. However, people joined because of the perks that came with being part of these organizations. These perks included outdoor activities, peer pressure, the desire for freedom from parents, and personal security. Furthermore, members were granted slots in the best universities and offered the best jobs in society. These were all attractive reasons for parents to enroll their children in each of these groups. However, some parents were hesitant. As such, they did not sign their children up to be brainwashed by the Nazis. But this choice was very short-lived. Hitler decided to take away the free will of the hesitant citizens when, in 1936, it was declared that membership of the HJ and BDM was mandatory. In the same year, all other youth groups were banned, including the Boy Scouts and other political youth development programs. Only those established by the Nazis were in operation, and every citizen was mandated to be a member. Well, except the Jews, who had been relegated from society at this point. Children and teenagers are basically the most dependent members of society, so why would someone as powerful as Hitler make such a weak audience his trump card? To Hitler, the youth were the future of the country and his campaigns, and he understood the importance of instilling his values in citizens while they were still young. In his infamous speech shortly after assuming the office of the Chancellor of Germany, Hitler said, "Your children belong to us already. You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." Such a strategic way of thinking. The HJ and BDM organizations sought to free children from the ideals of their parents, especially because most parents opposed Hitler's regime. As such, families and large groups who were heavily influenced by the wisdom of the older generation were a hindrance to the Nazis, and the youth were Hitler's trump card to overcome this obstacle. By establishing Hitler Youth, the German society became such that there was at least one supporter of the Nazis and Hitler's ideology in every family and large group. When you think about Nazi history, there are so many parts which send chills down your spine, and one of them is the role that the Hitler Youth played in the onset of World War II. A few weeks before the war broke out, the HJ, which was originally a Boy Scout team, was reformed into an auxiliary force which could perform war-related duties. The young teenage boys were trained as fire brigades and to assist with recovery efforts in German cities affected by Allied bombing. In 1942, Hitler issued the establishment of Hitler Youth Defense Training Camps, a program in which the HJ was converted into a military reserve by the Nazi generals. The point was to use the HJ boys as replacements for fallen German soldiers at the forefront of the war. Since HJ was already made compulsory for all male children, all the boys in the country were selected once they were 17. In other words, a group of 17-year-olds were sent out to war to play backup for veterans and other experienced soldiers. By 1945, the situation was much worse, and the Nazi generals didn't wait until the HJ boys turned 17 before they harvested them. 12-year-olds were pulled out of their classrooms and sent to the front lines, mainly for suicide missions. Because these boys were trained to be obedient all their lives, they rarely ever complained, and those who had the guts to were made a public example and executed. Those who survived were captured by the resistant forces and tortured beyond imagination. Either way, the boys of the Hitler Youth movement were puppets in the hands of the Nazis, who used them mercilessly as often as they lived and in any way they saw fit. The foundation of patriotism, as far as the Nazis were concerned, was to be an obedient citizen, diligently carrying out the rules listed by the administration. The youngsters lived by the 3 pillars they were taught at HJ and BDM camps, and they were expected to blindly obey whatever directives Hitler or his administration gave. More importantly, the Hitler Youth members were expected to act as spies. They were to report anybody who opposed Hitler's administration, be it their family members, friends, teachers, or a Jew. Failure to report incurred the same punishment as being the perpetrator. And as brainwashed as they were, it is not surprising that these young boys and girls were telltales. However, brainwashed or not, some of them fell in line simply out of fear of what would happen to them if they didn't. There were several cautionary tales in the Hitler Youth movement, and the earliest one happened in 1936, a few years after the Nazis took control of Germany. At the beginning of their regime, the Nazis were interested in their public perception, so they put up a facade and made several false promises to the German public. One of these promises was to make good citizens out of the millions of German children entrusted to the Hitler Youth movement and make them model citizens. In 1936, however, this promise was broken when 900 BDM girls got pregnant after a sex mania broke out at the annual Nuremberg rally. Since the rally was a mixed-gender event, the male and female branches of the Hitler Youth program took advantage of the situation and got involved in a mass sexual affair. Several occurrences of sexual assault were also thought to have transpired during this ordeal. The situation was to the shame of the Nazi government, who promised to train well-behaved citizens, and this raised concerns among the elite of the Nazi Party, whose children were also caught up in the scandal. To solve the problem of this scandal, the Nazi leaders punished the involved parties, and the party ordered the BDM girls, all of whom were between the ages of 14 and 18, to get abortions. There were not many survivors from the Hitler Youth program. Many died during the war or as a result of some cruel punishment. However, a few of those who made it out alive have described their experience as the biggest case of child abuse. From what we've seen, that sounds just about right. What do you think about the experiences of the Hitler Youths? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.